Hello class, in this relatively short video lecture we're going to talk about one of the contingency models of leadership, which is Fiedler's contingency model. And I wanted to have a lecture exclusively on this because, number one, I think it's important. It's an important model, and number two, it's a little more difficult to understand. If you look at the book, you look at the graphs in the book, it seems like it might be a little more difficult to understand, but it's actually very simple to understand and very applicable to certain situations out there. And if you're somewhat familiar with what your leadership style or behavior might be, remember we talked about initiating structure or task and consideration or relationship. If you know what your style of leadership is, and you also understand certain situational factors that may exist within an organization, you can determine whether or not you'll be successful within that organization. And again, it's something that in hindsight, if I had when I was practicing management for 15 years, I think it would have benefited me some, because I found myself in some situations where I wasn't exactly the right fit, if you will, for what was going on structurally in the organization I was at and the style that I had as a leader or manager. So I think it's a very relevant model that fits. Again, a little hard to understand if you're just looking at it for the first time. So I wanted to take this lecture video and really just discuss the elements of Fiedler's contingency theory. So again, we're talking about situational approaches, and you know, we looked at traits initially, then we looked at styles or behaviors, and now we're saying, well, wait a minute. It really does matter. The situation that a leader finds himself in does matter. You know as well as I do, a coach can win multiple championships in one town, move to another team or town, and not be successful at all and end up being fired. Well, what did the coach's style change? Probably not. It was probably situational factors within the organization that caused the success or the failure of the coach. So we are going to look at the situations at hand to determine leader effectiveness. It's also called the contingency approach to leadership. And in this one, we're really just going to be looking at the contingency leadership style, Fiedler's contingency theory. In other lectures in this module, we'll look at some other ones like the path goal theory and transformational leadership, and even LMX, where we start introducing some of the followers into the model, which is very popular today. But we're going to focus on this lecture just on Fiedler's contingency model of leadership. So there's a couple things we need to do when we're utilizing this contingency model of leadership. The first thing we need to understand is if the leader, which is you or me or whoever's looking at this model, is task-oriented or relationship-oriented. And then we're going to determine if that style fits the situation that we find ourselves in. Okay, so the first thing is, how do we determine if we're task-oriented or relationship-oriented, right? We might think something and then it may play out differently in a real-life situation. Well, there was a scale or a survey instrument that Fiedler used. It was called the least preferred coworker scale. And what you would do is you would first pick the person in your organization you would least like to work with. So who is that person that, above all the others, I do not want to work with this person? And then you answer questions kind of about that person or your relationship with that person. Would you rate them as friendly or unfriendly, tense or relaxed, efficient or inefficient? And then based upon your answers to that least preferred coworker scale, you could determine whether you were more task-oriented or whether you were more relationship-oriented. Don't ask me how that works. I have not utilized that scale in the past, but apparently it was a good indicator of task versus relationship orientation. The higher you scored, the more relationship-oriented. The lower you scored, the more task-oriented you were. Okay, so once we have that determined, once we have determined whether we are a task or relationship leader, the next thing we need to do is understand three dimensions within the organization. Three contingencies, three areas of situational control within the organization, right? And then rate, is it low, moderate, or high within the organization? The first one is leader-member relations. Reflects the extent to which the leader has the support, the loyalty, and trust of the work group. Okay? There are some organizations where that is very high. A leader has complete trust of the workforce. There's some where that is very low. No matter what happens, a new leader comes in, and what happened in the past, whatever, there lacks that trust, there lacks loyalty, and there lacks support, right? So it could be low, moderate, or high, that leader-member relations. The next thing is the task structure, extent to which tasks are routine and easily understood. So, am I walking into a place where everything is organized, everything is documented, everybody knows what they need to do, it's outlined in manuals and processes and procedures? Is it very organized, or is it loose? Is it loose? Is it not as well defined and organized, this situation that I'm walking in? And again, it could be low, moderate, or high. And the last one is position power. Remember from, I believe it was maybe Module 1, we talked about the different forms of power, and one of them was that positional power that someone has. It refers to how much power a leader has to make work assignments and rewards and punishments. So is the person who's in that position regarded to as someone who has the influence, has the authority, has the power to go ahead and initiate some things and people will follow it, or not? So how much power does that position power hold? And it could be, again, low, moderate, or high. Okay, so let's just pause a moment. We understand what type of leader we are, task or relationship oriented. We've also rated the leader-member relations in the organization, the task structures within the organization, and the position power within the organization, that position power that I'm walking into. Once we do that, we could go ahead and we could outline the different situational controls, and whether they're, moderate, low control situations, high control situations. So you can see we rate each one: good, 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 poor, 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 high, high, low, low, high, high, low, low, strong, weak, strong, weak, strong, weak, strong, weak. And we come up with really different situations here. And this one's a little, just ignore that line there in the screen. But there's 3 situations here, there's 4 situations here, there's 1 situation here. And within those situations, the different leadership behaviors or styles seem to work best. So we won't look at each and every one of these. Let's just take 1 or 2, for example, and see what type of leadership style works the best. So if we have good leader-member relations, so here's one of the control situations. If we have good leader-member relations, if we have high task structure, meaning it's very, very highly organized, and a strong position of power, what leadership style works best in that situation? It's a task-oriented or task-motivated leadership. So that's situation control number 1, and that calls for a task-oriented leader. And you can look at all of those too. Now let's just look at one that requires a relationship-oriented leader. Leader-member relations are poor. There's high task structure, so people know what to do, but the leader-member relations are poor. And the position power itself is strong. That would call for a relationship-oriented leader. Okay, and then again, you can look at all of these different scenarios. There's really 4 and 4 that match up right, because this one over here goes back to a task-oriented, where there's poor leader-member relations, low task structure, and weak positions of power. That requires somebody who is really focused on the task and bringing about order to the organization. So that's Fiedler's contingency model. Remember, just kind of in summary, we first need to understand what type of leader we are, relationship or task. We use the least preferred coworker survey to understand that. Then we rate these 3 situational controls: leader-member relations, task structure, position power. And once we do, we're able to put these into a grid. And when we have all of our options and different scenarios covered, we can say, okay, this scenario here calls for a task-motivated leader. This scenario here would call for a relationship-motivated or oriented leader.